Optimum translation Tokyo dialect to English. Narcolepsy was the reason I first stepped onto this dark road. I fell asleep at work more than once, and I cannot describe how that looks in a Japanese office. They could not fire me because I had a registered note with Human Resources regarding my condition. But that did not stop talk of Hatsuo the lazy and Hatsuo the snoozer between my derisive co-workers. I didn't fault them for their attitude. It is simply how we are. But I did fault my condition. Any money not spent on my tiny apartment and meager soups went to my sister, mother, and grandmother back in my village far outside Tokyo. I would never get ahead as long as I was known as Hatsuo the Napper in my office. I began to research narcolepsy. I asked my doctor, and he told me that the cells in my brain that produce sleep-regulating orexin had died. There was no cure. That word, orexin, stuck in my thoughts even louder than being told that there was no cure. Where had I seen that word? I was not long out of university, and it was finals time again. So I followed a vague memory and returned to the library where I'd once studied. It was full of students leaning over their textbooks in long rows of similar hair and similar dress like an assembly line, and I felt nostalgic for that different kind of stress for a moment. At the place, I'd stopped to look. I turned my head and saw a smudgy and faded posting on the public board. It was at least a year old, and several contact pieces had been torn from the bottom. This was how I'd seen it. I'd sat opposite while studying and intermittently stared at it for many nights without really looking at it. Orexin was one of the words listed under experimental trial implant for the regulation of brain chemicals. The paper was dirty, but I forced myself to take a contact piece and call the number, even though the posting had been at least a year old. The trial was still going on, and an older man on the other end set up an appointment for me that Saturday night. The trip by train and foot to the Keio Industrial District was long, and I arrived a little before dusk to find a rust-crowned warehouse at the address given. I was uncomfortable and even somewhat scared, but Hatsuo the dozer had to go. I squeezed under a padlock chain between two sections of chain-link fence and pulled open the large metal door as I'd been instructed. Inside was a completely professional and white waiting room. There was no greeter or even a desk, but I sat and waited. To avoid being rude, I did not tap my foot or look around too much. A high-pitched sound of drilling and sawing came from beyond a white door, but I tried not to think too much about it. It sounded like machinery was being constructed, and it might have been coming from a nearby business rather than the surgeon I was supposed to meet. A co-worker from my office, Issei, was also a patient. I first saw him when he pulled open the large sliding metal door and then shut it behind him. He sat at the opposite end of the room, an opposite row of chairs, and then looked surprised when he noticed me. "Hatsuo, you shouldn't be here." Before I could respond, the white door swung open. Hatsuo. The older man wore a white coat. I could not be sure if he was the same man from the phone call, but I stood, bowed, and then followed him inside. Issei's confusing statement rang in my ears as I looked around the surgical office. The big slope chair in the middle seemed comfortable enough, and the drills and saws on mechanical arms coming up from it like a metal shrub were shiny and clean. The surgeon held a device about the size of a housefly between his finger and his thumb. See, it's quite small. All this will do is regulate the orexin your brain needs to sleep and wake properly. It uses the same components your body is already sending to the dead cells there, so it will never run out. I nodded politely and sat down in the chair as instructed. He didn't tell me I had to be awake for the operation. He pulled my hair back, shaved a small circle, injected numbing agent around the spot, and lowered a whining drill. The sensation of having my skull drilled away in a small, vibrating spot was very odd and unpleasant, but I didn't want to be rude, so I said nothing. Once he was through my skull, he began picking and prying with small implements until he found the right spot, and I saw him take the small device and move it toward me and out of my sight. It didn't feel like anything, but I did imagine a sensation of increased pressure for a moment inside my head. "All done," he told me. "Oh, better patch this up." He began swabbing and sealing with some sort of gel. He held up a mirror. "How's that?" The gel had formed a small blue circle set in my skin. Talking was difficult, so instead I managed to nod and smile. He unclipped my hair and let it fall over the spot, hiding any public evidence that I'd had the surgery. "You should see immediate results." Issei was no longer in the waiting room as I moved through in a numb daze, but I wasn't sure where he could have gone. There was only the white door in and the large sliding metal door to the gravel yard. I let myself out into the night and walked the entire way home without taking the train. When I reached home, I realized what I'd done in making it the whole way on foot, and it felt great. I went to bed and slept very well. The next day at work, my mood was bright, and I worked much harder than before without growing tired. The surgeon hadn't told me that I would also feel better in addition to sleeping more regularly. My co-workers noticed and nodded with encouragement a few times. Issei stared at me from across the office with a frown. By the end of the week, Hatsuo the layabout was gone, and Hatsuo the not bad was my new nickname. But this only gave me a ticket to the arena of real work. Daichi, Eiji, and Issei were the star employees of the office, and I had only just begun to enter their level. The three of them came around one by one to tell me that I was not bad, but I shouldn't get my ego up, as that would be publicly embarrassing. Issei did this last of the three, but his heart did not seem to be in the jest. The boss was my fourth visitor that second week after the operation. Hatsuo, you've been doing well. New medication for narcolepsy." Unsure how to respond to praise in the workplace, I gave a slight seated bow. He did his best impression of an American boss, something he often did when addressing employees he didn't know well. "Good to hear, buddy." His smile was genuine for a moment, and then he dropped a few folders on my desk. In Japanese again, he said, "Let's test your skills." The accounts were not big purchases, but they were more important than the lowest-tier customers I had usually worked with. I worked tirelessly throughout the day until only Daichi, Eiji, and Issei remained in the office. I knew it was important for me to go home and sleep at a good time, but I wanted to see how far I could push it. I began to get tired at around 11 p.m. The implant had failed me. Issei saw my head dropping at times and stood to force a yawn. "Oh, I'm so tired, I really must go." He looked me in the eyes as he passed on his way out of the office, conveying his message. By leaving first, he had allowed me to go home as well without losing face. Daichi and Eiji called after me, "Good night, Hatsuo the Decent." I was very happy. But this was all I could do for the next few weeks. Issei did not leave first again, so I was forced by my yawning and heavy eyes to depart the office before the three of them. I could feel my new rank slipping. Worse, that night, my sister, mother, and grandmother called to tell me about the rent being raised. Their landlord was trying to force out his tenants to sell to a shopping mall construction company. I had to send more money that I did not have. That weekend, I went back to the surgeon. He was not surprised when I slid open that long metal door unannounced and knocked on the smaller white one beyond. Popping his head out, he said, You want me to adjust it up a little bit, don't you? They always do. He sighed but relented. All right, sit down. The drill went in easier this time, for the gel was softer than bone. New gel replaced the old, and I was on my way home not long after. This time I took the train. I could feel the energy filling me, but I wanted to be smart about using it, not just enthusiastic. That Monday night, I managed to stay at the office long enough that Daichi, Eiji, and Issei were all sharing furious glances with me and with one another. Papers flew left and right as we calculated accounts, filled out forms, and made late-night phone calls to other offices doing the same thing. Sale, sale, sale. Eiji fell backwards in his chair, and we fell silent. He was asleep on the floor. I'd done it. The ranks had been upset. Daichi was still first, but Issei was now second, and I was third. Eiji burned bright red when we woke him up, for he already knew what had happened. But I was new to hard work and personal energy, and there was no gaining on the indomitable Daichi. Issei, too, stayed far out of reach. Eiji tried to keep up, but he came in more haggard each day and eventually stopped staying late altogether. We saw him depressed and relying heavily on drinking water as he worked only the normal hours. A month later, the boss fired him. It was then that I began thinking about the day I'd seen Issei at the surgeon's office, and also about how the surgeon had reacted to my unannounced visit. Therefore, I went by a third time. The sounds of sawing and drilling stopped as I knocked on the inner white door. About 30 seconds later, the surgeon popped his head out again. This time, he did not even ask. He just directed me to the chair. I never thought I'd get used to the feeling of a drill going into my brain, let alone enjoy it. It was because I knew what it would bring. My personal energy was amazing. The orexin was at a maximum setting according to the surgeon, and I was bright and happy and enthusiastic to do my job in a way I'd never imagined before. Our late-night paperwork battles reached a fever pitch as all of the work available in the office got completed, and then some. We began forcing sales out of cold calls by pure earth-scraping hard work in our hunt for more and better figurative diamonds. The boss put the sales numbers on a whiteboard for the rest of our co-workers to see each day. I was lasting until 2, and sometimes even 3 in the morning. But Daichi was still always there and tireless, no matter how hard I tried to stay awake. For his part, Issei began to crack and falter. And one night, he chose to go on a date with a girl instead of stay late at work. He was out. He still worked late sometimes and often sent me concerned looks when he departed. But he had gotten a girlfriend, and would therefore never be top salesman. One night I drank 5 coffees and stayed at work until 4 in the morning. Daichi was still going strong even as I began to pass out, and I couldn't believe it. We had to be back at the office to start the morning in 3 hours. How could this man work so hard? Pretending to trip as I walked by him on the way out, I moved against him as part of my fall, and there it was, a small blue circle hidden under his hair. Issei was there on the street with his girlfriend as I began my angry walk to the surgeon for a final visit. Issei said to me, "Hatsuo, you have to stop." He pulled me aside for a moment on the sidewalk and showed me a blue dot under his hair. "You see, I'm like you, but I made the choice to stop." He wasn't like me. I pushed him away. I had to make money. I had to be the best. My family depended on me, and my co-workers would look down on me the same way if I gave up like he had. The surgeon seemed to be waiting for me. The long metal door was open already, and the white one within was ajar. I entered, and the surgeon began laying out his tools. This was no simple adjustment of the existing implant. This time, he pulled forth a device the size of a large bee. This will completely eliminate your need for sleep. Are you sure you're ready for that? You can't go back." I nodded, not with polite acceptance, but with angry determination. He did not notice or care. He began the surgery with a larger drill, and I shivered as random sensations flashed through my awareness. The implantation made me feel hot and cold at the same time. And then it was done. He filled up the larger hole with more blue gel, and I headed back to work with a rushing spring of energy inside me. Not even Daichi could match this. He still had to sleep, and I was triumphant as he finally went home at 5 in the morning while I kept working throughout the night. It only took a week and a half for the boss to congratulate me as the new top salesman and direct me to my office one night after everyone else had gone home. He drove me to the new building himself and told me this was all possible thanks to my growth and sales. I had my own office. This was incredible. I had never thought a poor boy like myself would go so far. It seemed that my boss was proud too, because I saw him talking and grinning to an older man at the opposite end of the office. That man seemed familiar, but without his white coat, I did not recognize him at the time. Instead, I closed my door and got to work at my new computer. I even had my own private bathroom, and on the other side of the room, a delivery slot for meals the company ordered on my behalf. Life without the need for sleep was amazing. I worked every minute of every hour for perhaps 7 or 8 weeks straight without needing to leave my new office. Food was delivered through the slot, and I went to the bathroom in my own luxurious little side room. There were no gossiping co-workers to distract me, and nobody could approach my lead in sales. Somewhere in the 8th or 9th week, I got a call from my sister, mother, and grandmother thanking me for the money that had saved our house and telling me to come visit. I didn't think I could take a day off, but I gave in and agreed to visit for a few hours since it was, after all, a Saturday. It was then that I discovered my fate. My fate is not mine alone. I was the first, but I know I will not be the last. I opened the door of my office to find a brick wall. At some point in the last 8 or 9 weeks, they'd bricked me in, and I'd never noticed. I tried to call someone for help, but I didn't know where this new building was. My boss had driven me, and my sister, mother, and grandmother eventually told me to stop making a fuss and get back to work. He'd made the same choice as I had. For a few weeks I could hear Daichi screaming from his own nearby office, but they soon bricked him over deep enough to silence that. My computer received a new program recently, a digital whiteboard. There are new names on it every day, and the rate of additions is growing. Unfortunately for them, I am at the top of that list, because I have the highest sales, and I will continue to be the best, because I have nothing else left.